Hi, I'm Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about how to start a podcast in 2024. I feel like these days when you're scrolling on social media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, you can't help but see little snippets and excerpts from podcast episodes. So you might be thinking, everybody has a podcast. And the truth of the matter is, everyone does, me included. I have a podcast called You Are Here that is available on Spotify, Apple, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. And it's mostly about stories from people who are taking unconventional and courageous paths in life to show you, the audience, all of the possibilities that life has to offer. More on that in a bit. I was having a conversation with a girlfriend of mine, and she has a little toddler. And when I told her that my podcast was on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts and to search for it, she said, "Oh my gosh, you're listed on those major platforms." And I said, "Yeah, anyone can." And she said, even if I wanted to have my toddler have a podcast, I could. And I said, yes, you could literally record your child saying whatever and uploading it on all of these platforms. The entry into creating online or creating in a digital way is so low now that if you have an idea or if you have a point of view and you want to get your voice out there, it's never been easier. Which brings me to point number one in how to start a podcast of know your why. Do you want to entertain your audience? Do you want to educate your audience? Do you want to inspire? There's so many reasons for why people start podcasts. Sure, there's the more business aspect of things. If you are the podcast host or you're the owner of the podcast, thinking, okay, could this be a revenue stream? Is this a distribution channel for my business, my personal brand? But there's the deeper sense of what is the intention behind why you want to start this. For me, and You Are Here, I'm at this really interesting crossroads in life where I've been working for several years, and as you get older, you see a lot of your social circle, a lot of your peers going off in different directions in whatever way that means to you, but there's so many different possibilities. And what I'm sensing in my peer group is that they want to see what else is out there. They want to be able to hear the inspiring stories of other people who are living unconventionally in hopes that perhaps that can give them the courage or the inspiration or even the education that they may be seeking in order to actually make that leap for themselves or to see what possibility could look like in their own lives. So because I know that about my own personal circle, about my peers, and where I am personally in my life stage, I really gravitate towards those conversations. So I really wanted to have a platform to be able to share more stories around people who are living unconventionally. It's also about sharing stories from people who are very true to themselves and are looking for ways to feel aligned, to feel fulfilled in their career and in their life. So for you, if you're interested in starting a podcast, really understand your why of what is the intention and what is the purpose and message that you'd like to bring out into the world. Because naturally, now here comes the audience side of things. If you're sharing certain stories about a certain life phase or life stage or certain topic, like will attract like. If you are married and have kids and you're talking about mom life, you will naturally attract an audience of moms or parents who are married, who have kids, who are working, and who are looking for ways on how to navigate all of it. So if you're looking to create a community or looking to spread a message around something very specific that means something to you, chances are very likely that you will be attracting that same type of person in listening to your content. So knowing your why is super important because that's how you actually attract who you want to within your podcast community. Next, you also need a name and cover. Once you start reflecting on what your why is, the title will naturally come. So You Are Here in the context of this podcast, it means you are here and find beauty in where you are now and where you would like to be. And then when it comes to the podcast cover, I'm not the greatest at this because I didn't do a whole photo shoot for it. I didn't do a whole conceptual brainstorm. I just wanted to get something out there. So I took an older photo of myself that felt happy, that felt empowering, that felt uplifting, because that is how I want people to feel when they listen to these stories. I made something in Canva, and there you have it. Next is choosing your podcast format. As I'm talking to you solo, one-on-one like this, I also have solo episodes on my own podcast where I share life experiences, insights, or things that I've discovered along the way that I want to share with other people. But the large majority of my content on my podcast is sharing interesting stories from others who are living a different life path than myself, but are opening up the world to other possibilities. So know what kind of format you would like to lean more into. Just because you have one format of you want to do a guest style interview doesn't mean that you can't pepper in certain solo episodes for yourself, or have something maybe even more community oriented and have a Q&A. So you can have a hybrid of all of it, but just know what the main format is for your podcast, because that will help you create a schedule and create the system that you need to keep your podcast going on a consistent basis. So speaking about consistency, knowing what your schedule is really important and key so that you can plan accordingly. Now, the traditional format and cadence for a podcast is weekly, but I've seen it in so many different formats. There are weekly ongoing episodes, so 52 episodes every year, or I've seen people do seasons. So there could be a season 1 of 10 episodes or 12 episodes, and then they take a break to kind of recharge, rest, and get another backlog of content ideas going, interviews scheduled, and then they launch season 2, which is sort of the phase 2 or maybe second era of their podcast. So it's another iteration of it. So there's literally no right or wrong way to either way, but just knowing ahead of time what your schedule is will help you create that system that you need to keep things going. That was just for a weekly option, but I've definitely seen some that are bi-weekly, even monthly. So it really just depends on what your intention is and what your capacity is as well. Is this something that you really want to be a primary focus for yourself, your personal brand, your business, or is this something more supplementary that you want to do more casually as things come up for you, as topics start igniting in your brain? So this all informs the type of system and planning that you put into place. Now, when I talk about systems, this means the actual management of how things run. Despite me saying that anyone can start a podcast, it is true, anyone can, but to keep it going and to be consistent with it so your audience knows when to check in on you, when a new episode is releasing, when all of these things occur, it's really important to have a system in place, because there is the actual planning phase of scheduling out your guests. Are you reaching out to your network? Then there's the actual scheduling and recording of that podcast. When is that happening? How far out are you actually scheduling? Is it something timely that needs to occur with the launch of something that your guest is promoting? So it needs to be scheduled and published at a certain time. When are you going to edit? There are so many considerations that come into place. So having the right system is super important. So when it comes to creating a system, use a process that works for you. For me, I lean very heavily on Notion. So I have a whole Notion podcast hub that I use that really helps me out in keeping me organized and keeping me on track. The next thing to consider around starting a podcast is the equipment and the technology that you will need to actually do this. Now, podcasts are audio first, but obviously there is a visual element as well. If you start thinking about your promotional strategy and creating reels and shorts and ways that you want to promote the podcast, so you may also want to include some video to it. But primarily, if we're just talking about audio, there is the mic, the pop filter, and then the tools that come with that. So what I use is this Blue Yeti. This does the trick. It is less than $200. I want to say it's around $100 to $150, but I've had this for years and it's such a great investment. I honestly think even if you don't have a podcast, that you can use this for anything. If you have a voiceover that you need to do, it just brings in the sound so much better than what is actually in your computer. The second is headphones. So these are my headphones. I don't use anything fancy, but it does the trick. So these are by Knox Gear. Obviously, I think there are probably more fancy brands that are super expensive, but if you're someone who wants to keep things really low budget, really easy, especially as you build up your brand, build up your podcast, and you just want to get started, for me, didn't want to have money be a barrier to why I couldn't get started. So I didn't want the fact that I don't have a professional professional podcast studio, or I don't have really expensive headphones, or I don't have a super professional mic that's like really fancy and has all of these different settings. I didn't want any of that to be a barrier. I wanted to keep things really simple so I could say, hey, if I just as a bundle bought maybe, let's say $200 worth of necessary required equipment, then I could go ahead and get started. So that was more of my priority. Everyone is different, but I would say if you're just looking to start, keep things as low entry as possible. So now the third piece of equipment is this thing. It is called a pop filter. Basically, what a pop filter does is it filters out some of those hard sounds. So a lot of times through audio, it can be really sensitive, especially when you're using a professional mic. So sometimes those hard sounds with an S will come through really loudly in the audio. And so this helps filter it. And then lastly, when it comes to the sound quality, if you can create a space that is a little bit more insulated, that does wonders. So what I've seen actually a lot of people do, funny enough, is that they will put a blanket up on the wall, like almost like one of those moving blankets that you use to cover your furniture. They've put that up on the wall to help some of the bounce and some of the sound stay a little bit more insulated. Now I'm in an open loft, so it's a little bit difficult to do that, but with the tools that I'm about to get into, you can kind of trick the sound into sounding like you're in a professional studio. Now, for the technology and the recording aspects of things. So there are a couple of different tools. So I'm going to share the one that I use mostly because I have obviously the most familiarity with it, but I use Riverside.fm to record for video. Now I use this for my guest interviews because what I really like about their video platform is that all the video files are stored on your local computer. So if someone's connection lags, it's all stored locally. So even if you see in real time the lag happening, know that as you're recording it, there actually is no lag. And what I also like is that there is this AI feature where you can create magic clips where it pulls out specific points in the conversation where you will be able to make these into social deliverables if you want to. Now that's for my guest interviews. When I'm just doing a solo episode, I actually record in Descript. It's super powerful and I'm actually going to show you some of the audio features that it has that I really like. So all you have to do is set up your mic situation and there's this little button that you can use. And once you toggle this over to studio sound on, it sounds like you are in a professional studio.
Hi, I'm Andrew from Descript, here to tell you about our newest feature. It is called Studio Sound, and I'm actually using it right now. Here, I'll turn it off so that you can hear the difference.
So now that I've talked about Riverside FM and also Descript, I'll show you my actual workflow. So for me, since I told you earlier on that I normally record podcasts with a guest, I do use Riverside FM, but because I like the studio sound in Descript, what I end up doing is I actually export what's in Riverside over to Descript, and I think the editing features within Descript are a lot more customizable, and you can use a lot of the audio engineering to be able to fine-tune specific areas a lot easier than Riverside. Both are wonderful platforms and I need both, but I find the post-production, the editing side of things a lot easier to use on Descript. Now, lastly, of course, now that you've recorded your wonderful podcast and I hope it gets thousands and thousands of downloads, now you need to actually distribute it before you can get those downloads. So I use Spotify for podcasters and it's so easy. On the back end, you can just plug and play. All you need is your title, your description, your cover art, audio itself as a separate file, and you're good to go. Once you actually use Spotify for podcasters, it will distribute your main podcast that you upload for Spotify into all of the other channels, whether that's Apple, whether that's Overcast, or any of the other platforms. It automatically does it once you are hooked up to Spotify. So I hope that if you are starting a podcast that you found this really helpful. I know for me, I had to kind of dig around for all of this information. So I'm hoping that this is a one-stop video for you to be able to see all the tools that you need, see what you need to be thinking about. And for anything that I have talked about in this video, I will have links for in the description box. Let me know if you have any questions. See you next week.